Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch.
Hey, man. You got your vest on. You've been outside. You've been walking sites, haven't you?
Yeah, it's slimming. You got on your what is that? Is that from like the CCP? The is that from like the '88 Olympics?
East Germans, East Germans outfit right here.
For those of you that are watching video, I've got on a vest and Ian has on what looks like a track suit for the Russian Olympic team. Ian's a power eater. It's a tertiary sport in the Olympics.
Very comfortable. It's very soft, very warm. Gets a little cold in my office sometimes.
All right, so I'll tell you a funny story. I didn't even tell you about this morning. So I ran by Ellie this morning as I'm leaving the house. Ian and I are due to be on the phone at 10. It's 9:43. And I'm in what I slept in the night before. And I had like a bunch of people over the house. I was doing a bunch of things. And I looked at Ellie and I'm like, supposed to be on a Zoom call, showered at the office with Ian at 10. I got him right where I want him. I'm like, I don't know how I can be better positioned. Like, I really know I'm going to be right on time.
He tells this story now, but this morning he texted me and said, I'm still out in the field. Field apparently for Frank meant he was in his pajamas still at home, not doing shit. That's sweet, Frank.
I mean, I sleep in Lululemon. You can go to meetings and that nowadays. I mean, shit, you're recording a podcast in Lululemon.
Frank will go to no ends of the earth to just absolutely disrespect my time. He's very good at it. He loves to do it just to get me going because his time, everybody, is way more valuable than mine. Apparently, that's everything. Everyone's on Frank's time. He's an important guy.
It's true, and I love when you get interrupted. It's just there's not even apologies. Like, I gotta take this. You deserve it. All right, so we're going to talk about something today that's pretty cool. So for those of you that are looking, you can see it. It's a book by John Irving, and it's called A Prayer for Owen Meany. And Nickel, who is referenced a lot on here, my best friend from childhood, bought me this book in like 99 or 2000. And he's like, you got to read this book. It's incredible. It's written by John Irving, and John Irving's written a bunch of great books, and he wrote the Cider House Rules, which became a very, very popular movie. So the same author.
Is that a John Candy movie, Cider House Rules?
I think Tobey Maguire, the kid that became Spider-Man was in that, and Charlize Theron, I think. I'm almost positive. But A Prayer for Owen Meany, it's his little kid, but little. He's like, if this was being recorded in the 80s, we would have called him a midget. In today's parlance, he's a little person or a dwarf, but he's about 100 pounds and he's about 5 foot tall, fully grown. So he is smaller than everybody else, and that's relevant in this story for a lot of different reasons. But so Nickel sends me this book. I bring it with me to Europe. And
you navigated the sensitivities of little people very well there. I'm not sure you're going to offend anyone, and I was nervous. I was quite sure you couldn't do it.
It's still early. So we may need to rely upon our incredible editors. But this book shows up at my house through the power of most likely Amazon in the early 2000s. And I'm just a broke kid. I'm 24, 25. And I ended up getting invited to go to Europe. So one of my friends had miles and flew me over there. So long story short, I packed this book with me. So it was my first trip to Europe without my parents. And I brought this book. I was there for, like 15 days. I had a great time. But this book is kind of imprinted in my brain of being from that era. So I'll tell a funny story. So like, I'm so broke back at this point in my life, like I don't even have a bathing suit. Like I had a bathing suit, but I didn't really have one I would wear out. So I would just wear gym shorts. So I remember being on a beach in France with Owen Meany in gym shorts and like boxers. And I'm so excited because it turns out I'm on a topless beach. I guess this is like normal in France.
Oh yeah.
And like I see this beautiful girl who's like age appropriate for me. And there's like a perfect spot right next to me. And I think she's walking towards me and ends up going in a slightly different direction where I can't really see her. And instead, I get this girl's grandmother who sits down next to me, takes off basically all of her clothes, and lathers herself up with nothing other than olive oil. It was terrible.
Did you offer to help?
No, I just buried my head in Owen Meany and pretended I wasn't on the beach. I'm pretty sure I got a suntan on my back, like I got burned.
I'm picturing like the lady from Something About Mary who's always in the sun
It was
like that.
It was close to that, very much so. And most French people are incredibly lean. This was the exception to the rule. I told Ian this story in great detail, and he's like, Frankie, we're still trying to build an audience. Cut it. So this is where we'll cut the story, but suffice it to say, if the beauty was next to me, maybe I never finish A Prayer for Owen Meany, and my life takes a completely different trajectory. But as fate would have it, I got through the book. So on March 11th of 2020 is when President Trump spoke from the White House and started talking about COVID. And I just so happened to be in San Diego, California, and I help run the mastermind group, The Collective Genius. And we show up on the 12th, and it's like, what in the hell just happened? And I had done a presentation 6 months earlier about what you do when you enter into a recession, and I actually dusted it off real quick. And I did it that morning, and we started talking about it. And I referenced the book, A Prayer for Owen Meany. And everybody in the audience just kind of looked at me like glassy-eyed. I don't think anyone had read it. They didn't know what I was talking about. But what I told Owen, what I told Ian in preparation for this is, I remember reading this book, and they talked about the shot. And what the shot was is the two stars of the story. Owen Meany is one of them, and he's the small person. And his best friend just did this silly shot. Like it was like an alley-oop in an empty gym where they would time it, and John would pick Owen up, he'd get the basketball, and he would dunk it. And they did this, in my memory, they did this for like half of the book. And it was always like, why did they do, like when there was an extra day or they had an extra hour, they would go practice the shot. And it was, if you're a guy like going to throw a football or a baseball with one of your buddies or shooting hoops, it's a time to catch up and have some camaraderie. But like it was this thing they always came back to in the book, the shot. And it was just silly. Like Ian, at some point they would have like a janitor time shot. They needed to be done with it in under 3 seconds. So you never really knew why, but it just happened over and over. And what I referenced back in March of 2020, when COVID was starting to happen, is you're going to call on skills that you didn't even realize you had, or that you knew you had, and you're going to have to rely upon all of them, because we're entering into something that is incredibly different and difficult to get through. So we fast forward to the end of the book, and what ends up happening is Owen Meany, this is during the era of Vietnam, Owen Meany is with John, and they just so happen to be somewhere there's a gaggle of Vietnamese kids. And someone who is against the Vietnam War decides to try and kill Owen Meany, John, and the kids. And what ultimately happens is he throws a hand grenade, and the hand grenade lands, and Owen says, we've got 4 seconds. And they don't speak. John just picks up the grenade, picks up Owen, and pushes him through a window. And because he was so small, he could get through. And he ultimately dies, but he saves the life of tons and tons of kids because he was prepared for this inane moment. Now, in real life, you're probably not going to do something like the shot. But in my life, what I've noticed is when I work hard and I have like a vision or a goal in front of me, I never know how it's going to manifest. And in many instances, that skill comes back to benefit me. And in this book, in my head, how it lives, and in reality, how it works in the book, is this kid saves a ton of people's lives by just having this one skill that he worked on perfecting for almost a decade.
It's as you were telling me the story, it reminds me of one of my favorite 80s movies, The Karate Kid, where, you know, you're subjected to 20 minutes in that movie of watching Danielson on his hands and knees scrubbing the floor and waxing the car, and you don't know where the hell it's going, until Mr. Miyagi comes out and tries to kick and punch him 100 times, and he does all of the practices. It's the old, you got thousands and thousands of reps, and you just never know when they're going to be valuable, when you're going to apply what you practice. And the whole concept to me is fascinating, in that just about every big moment in my career or my life that I can think of where I performed in a way that I looked at it and thought, damn, pretty good, right? You're kind of impressed by yourself a little bit. Something happened. In no case was it ever just random or luck that I performed well. It was always, I could always look back at all of the reps that I had built, the mental reps or the physical reps, where when I was in that moment, you said, what, he had 3 or 4 seconds to get through the window and save all the people.
That's
They
right.
didn't talk, they didn't think, it was a reflex because they had practiced it hundreds and hundreds of times just for fun, that they just did it, and they did it well. And that's really what happens. It's, when you close a big deal, when you have a sale that goes well, when you convince your manager of something, when you execute on a project that you're working on with a team, it's rare that you look back and think, where'd that come from? If you really think about it, you had the reps involved.
So I've read this book, and I've read it twice. I read it last week to prepare for today, and Ian kind of read the 21st century equivalent of Cliff Notes. And this was fascinating to me, Ian. The day before Owen Meany died, they were in Arizona, and there was a basketball hoop, and Johnny asked Owen, "Do you want to do the shot? Go practice." And Owen goes, "Nah, we've done it 1,000 times. We don't need to do it. Let's go do something else." And I thought that was kind of a throwaway thing the first time I read it. But when I read it again, is the skill is going to be called upon. He doesn't know it's going to be tomorrow, but it's called upon the next day. But he put in so much work, he didn't need to cram. It was just second nature. And that's what I think the author was trying to say. And I think it's what you just said a second ago: Karate Kid, business, whatever, all of those things lead into you're ready for it. So speaking of you're ready for it, one of my favorite actors, comedians, and like late night guys, there's lots of choices, but I've always been an NBC guy, and I've always been I don't know. I love Letterman when he was on NBC, and then my dad loved Johnny Carson, and I'm a Fallon guy. I'm a Jimmy Fallon guy. So unless you're living under a rock, you know who Jimmy Fallon is. He hosts.
You were a huge Bill Cosby guy too back in the day. I remember, big Cos fan.
You're a dick. We're not editing that part out. But
sorry, did I throw you off? I'm sorry. Go proceed with Jimmy Fallon.
But Jimmy Fallon was on Saturday Night Live for years, years. And then he ended up hosting the show that David Letterman made famous, which was the Late Show, or Late Night with Letterman and Fallon. So that was the show that was on at 12:30 to 1 o'clock and 1:30 in the morning. It was popular for college kids. But it's a television program that has an opening monologue. It has a band. It has guests. Like, you would think that it's like the AAA equivalent of pitching for the New York Yankees. Like, yeah. It's as close as you can possibly get. Jimmy Fallon ultimately ends up as the host of The Tonight Show. And I remember reading an article, he was like 4 shows in, and he goes, "I can't believe it." He goes, "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. And I'm 4 shows in, and I've used every single skill I've ever accumulated to get to this far." And I thought it was incredible. Like, he had the job that could prep him for it. And even though he was as prepared as he possibly could be, when he got to that next level, it really stretched his skills. But he did incredibly well because he put in all that work and had all the skills. He knew how to do everything, but it still wasn't easy.
And, even before Saturday Night Live, where you're doing a lot of that, he had worked on improv. He had worked on stand-up. He had worked on, he grinded his way up there in front of audiences of 7. that were all jeering him at some point, so by the time he got, and a lot of those, when you're in the middle of that, you just think, what am I doing? Like there had to have been so many moments where Jimmy was like, I'm going to have to go get a job at some point because this sucks. No one's turning out to watch me. What am I doing here? And I think that's, boy, there's a lot of times in my life where I've thought that, what am I doing? What am I selling right now? What is this product? I could care less about this. What is this all going to mean for me in my career? And, I think what I didn't understand when I was younger in my career was how transferable all those skills were when I changed context. I just didn't quite understand it. And we talked a little bit, I think there's a lot of parallels in the Owen Meany book to Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers and his 10,000 hour rule, whether it's the Beatles playing thousands of late night venues, thousands and thousands of hours of play together as a band before they got their big chance on Ed Sullivan. They were relaxed on Ed Sullivan, even though at that point it was the most watched event ever on television. To them, it was doing more of what they've just done. It was a reflex. It's,
the moment wasn't too big for them because they put in all the work.
They put in the work. They put in, it's, Wayne Gretzky playing hockey 10 hours a day from the time he was 4 years old on a chopped up lake in the backyard where, when he gets on smooth surface, he's incredible. Or Barry Sanders talks about how he learned his running style from playing flag football. He played flag football for years before he played tackle. So he just learned how to keep people away from touching him at all. And he proved to be very good at that once they were allowed to reach out and grab him. So I think what I always struggled with the 10,000 hour rule, because I read it when I was younger, was applying it to business and really understanding what are the things that I'm doing in business that I'm accumulating hours on, and how and when do I pivot and use those things to do things that will make me a lot more money, but also do things that I just really enjoy, and how, when am I going to be able to link those skills to different things. And so I think a big part of what we're going to talk about today is going to be looking back at the bigger moments in our career and trying to find some parallel path that we were on years before that we hadn't even noticed we were on.
There's a saying that I love, and it's timing, perseverance, and 10 years of trying will eventually make you look like an overnight success. And in the examples that you just talked about with the Beatles and Gretzky and Barry Sanders and the 10,000 hour rule, Malcolm Gladwell also focuses on Bill Gates. And Bill Gates just so happened to be in one part of the state or the country that had a computer that he could practice on. It's almost the same as like Mark Zuckerberg being a little kid and being in his family's garage and working on coding, or Tiger Woods chipping golf, like the new Tiger documentary just came out, chipping golf balls in his garage for years, like starting at the age of 3. Someday you get to link all those skills together. And when you're wearing the red shirt on Sunday, everybody gets behind you. But the red shirt on Sunday never happens unless you do all of that work behind it. And it's the reason the Beatles did incredible when they were on Ed Sullivan. It's the reason Tiger rarely ever loses on Sunday, because he's done the work and has this mental belief that nobody can beat him because nobody's worked harder.
Love it. So when you talk about linking, I think the first time that I can think about in my career, the right after college, I had a commission sales job, and my job was to drum up new business. So I cold called. I had a book. It's called the Harris Directory. So it listed every industrial company within 100 miles of my zip code, A through Z, straight up to, it was a telephone book. But the directory would tell you how many employees worked there, what their average revenue was, So you could go through, now there's much better software for this, but I had a book, like an encyclopedia, a book. And it was updated once a year. So it would say plant manager, maintenance manager. It would list certain things, and half the time you called, they'd already left, they'd quit. But you had pretty good information that, when you paid for this. And I would just call people. And um, I proved to be pretty decent at it. And when I think about how I got ready for it, I never had a sales job before that job at GE. I never, unlike you, I didn't spend a significant amount of time working in a restaurant, which I would consider a sales job. My internships were all engineering. They were very operational focused. But what I did have is I was in a fraternity in college, and in a fraternity, you are pushed out of your comfort zone all the time. So, that a big part of a fraternity is partying, right? Obviously. And I did my share of that. But when I look back at that fraternity, you have what's called rush functions, where you have to go convince kids to come join your house versus another house. And you're there and people are walking in, and it's like a big networking function. You walk over, you shake hands with people, you try to convince them of why your group of guys is better than the next. And I think even bigger than that, Frank, is if you want to be considered one of the better fraternities on campus, you have to make sororities feel comfortable when they come over to your house for a party. So you'd have what's called a two-way or a four-way, and a two-way is just a fraternity and a sorority, or a four-way is two fraternities and two sororities. But if you're hosting, and normally what would happen is a big group would all show up at once. So the sorority would have their pledges all drive over at the same time. So 1 second it's just a bunch of dudes standing around with like a punch bowl of some kind of fruity concoction we came up with, and a bunch of bush lights and a DJ playing some music, and it's a bunch of dudes. And the next minute there's 60 girls in your basement looking around of what to do. And that moment when all the girls walk in, and they're all pretty girls dressed up, looking good, and most of the guys in the fraternity are pretty shy. There's a lot of them that are, not great at walking over and shaking hands. And I wasn't either at first, but it was awkward. If you didn't walk over, it just sent a signal of you're not a welcoming group of guys. You're kind of dorky. And so I would always just force myself to just greet them, walk over and say hi, and can I get you something? Can I take your coats? What can I do? And over time you get better at it. Like, that is a cool bracelet, or I love what you did with your hair, or you just try to make them feel comfortable find something in common. But and a lot of the guys from my fraternity, Tim McHenry was incredible at this. He was our social for 4 years. Half the time we would just go over together because we're nervous, right? And Tim would be like, "Follow me, E," and he'd just go over and start chatting. But I tell this story because when I started cold calling, it's the same. You try to find something in common that you have. You make a nice little compliment. How do you build rapport? You get used to, in a fraternity, there were the girls that would be not too into talking to you, and they'd be like, and they'd go walk over to the punch bowl, and you'd get dissed, and the boys would make fun of you, and you had to just get over that crap. You had to get over the fact that that's going to happen. And it was the same with cold calling. 9 out of 10 people hung up on me, were rude, said no, didn't pick up. And so you learned how to not take it as personal, but it was a skill that very much I saw transferred to sales for me, and it helped me find success very, very quickly.
It's funny, I never thought about this, but when I was a kid and I was working at the Outback, I was 16 years old, and there was they weren't girls, they were beautiful women that worked there. And I was a busboy, and like we were all on the same team. Like I was bussing tables and they were doing all this stuff. And I had no nerves to talk to these people that if they were in my high school math class, I would have been petrified of. And what I learned there was they're just normal people who want to be communicated to. And that was a skill that I learned that I took back to high school that helped just communicating with girls in my age, because I looked at it, I'm like, I don't know, it was kind of a breakthrough thing. But it's funny, there's always an area where you do something and you start to do it well, and you kind of sit back and reflect a little bit, and you're like, this is the exact same skill. Why am I nervous or scared to do it here when I'm not scared to do it in this context?
Your first job was construction, but you ultimately decided, I think I could be good in sales. Do you think you had that kind of confidence because of your time waiting tables, because of selling?
So,
Where did you have the confidence to say I can get into sales? Because you knew you had construction chops
yeah.
out of the gate. That was your degree.
So my full name is Frank Bernard Cava. My first name, Frank, comes from my granddad, Frank, who was an electrician and a policeman. And I got that skill set from him. And my dad followed in that line of work. When I was a little kid, my dad moved us to Florida and he worked to work for Bernard, my mom's dad. And Bernard, the legends about him is that he was just this incredible salesman. So he was always charming, and he was a salesman. And my mom would always reinforce that in me. Like, there was plenty of reinforcement that I was a lot like my dad and my dad's family, but my mom would always bring up, she's like, you have a lot in common with your other granddad. And he was always an incredible salesman. She goes, I see how people light up when you say hi to them and when you engage with them. She's like, you're a great salesperson. So I kind of learned that. And it started way before high school, when I was at the Outback or even into construction. I learned that I was fearless. I learned that I was someone who enjoyed selling. Like, I believed that if I was selling you M&Ms, it was good for you to buy M&Ms from me because it was good for my basketball team or my baseball team, or if I was out holding the banner up so we could do a car wash or whatever it was. Like, these are the things that we used to do in the 80s when I was a kid. And like, I got run off from like the local grocery store because the manager's like, sir, you don't have a permit and you're just out. He's calling me sir. I'm like 9. And I'm like, all right, well, my mom's in there somewhere shopping, so I need to go find her. Like, I got kicked off, but like the next time we went back, I was like, I'm going to sell M&Ms again. Like, so I don't know what it was, Ian, but I'll tell you this. The big two things that I knew about sales, I knew I could do it. And then I found myself in positions that I don't think I deserved to be in because I could sell. Back when I was a kid, they had like travel basketball teams and I made it. I was the worst kid on the team and it wasn't even close. But I was pretty positive I was there because we needed to raise money, and I would go out and just knock door to door, and I made the team. And then another thing happened with me where I was a kid there was a middle school sales contest. I won it in 7th and 8th grade. And in 7th grade, you got to go into this thing called the money machine, and all this money kicked up. And I didn't know how the thing worked. So I pulled some money out of the sky, and I only got like $100, but I didn't understand it. So the next year I'm like, I want to get in that money machine again, and I want to win. And I actually figured out how the money machine works. So I had like $250, which when I was in 8th grade was $1 million. But I remember how it made me feel. So I knew I was good at it. And I knew that it made me feel like a success because I was able to do well in it.
Isn't it? It's incredible too, because it's how your confidence can get built up when other people tell you you're good at something.
Yeah.
I'm sure you got compliments from customers, or your manager at Outback would talk to you about those things, or winning those competitions. I, my fraternity brothers voted me in to be rush chairman a couple of times, which means you're the head of recruiting. And I knew I was pretty good at it, right? I knew when we were having a big party, people would be like, Mathews, get downstairs. If I was showered, the girls are getting here. Like, there were 4 or 5 of us that had to be down there when it started, just because we were kind of the guys that got it started, that got the conversation going. People didn't like it if we were upstairs. They needed us downstairs. So you start to feel a different level of confidence that I'm pretty good at this persuasive thing. I'm pretty good at starting a party, getting energy going. And you think I could make a career out of that. I could go apply those skills, but it helps to hear other people see it in you and not just yourself.
Right. And you also get a track record in it. You kind of recognize, like, I'm good at this. But like for me, I had no idea selling candy bars for basketball or winning the 7th and 8th grade sales contest for my middle school. I had no idea that was going to help me anywhere. So I'd win a few contests selling blooming onions and cheese fries at the Outback. But when I saw a company come across that said, hey, we hire people to build houses, but if you're good at building houses, we're going to let you sell. Like I knew if I could get to sales, I was going to do incredible because I always win sales contests. And I was a lot more humble, and I was also a lot less of able to articulate what I'm articulating now. I just had a belief. I knew that if I could figure out how to get into sales, I was going to do well. They were going to train me. And if with my inherent ability and with the time that I'd put in, I knew that I was going to figure it out. So what happens is you don't know where this stuff starts. When you're in elementary school or middle school, you never know where it's going to go. Zuckerberg didn't know because he liked to take apart Ataris and put them back together. He was going to build Facebook, but he got really passionate about it. It just so happened when time lined up, he had the skills to connect the dots.
Well, I think this podcast is a great example of it. Over a decade, you and I have had hundreds and hundreds of conversations about business, whether it was something I was facing, something you were facing, but a lot of the time, it isn't even that. It's I listen to a podcast and tell you you got to listen to it, and let's not talk about it until you've listened, and then we get together and we chat, or you see a movie, or we bring up a sports game and say, isn't that fascinating the way the captain did this? We've done this so many times that when it came down to start making podcasts, right now we have more ideas for episodes than we have time to record them. We got a couple of hundred ideas that we really want to do. We just don't have the time. We only have a few hours a week, but we practiced. And by doing an actual podcast now, by getting out and doing it, recording it, getting the microphones, editing it, putting it out on a platform, we have no idea what we're doing, but something tells me in 5 years, we're going to look back at this year, 2020 and 2021, and say, we were building some other reflex for something else we're doing that maybe is a totally different tangent than whatever this show is today. Who knows? It may be, and it may not be. But what I do know is we're putting in a lot of hours right now practicing something that could go somewhere, could not go somewhere, and we won't know for another 5-10 years.
When Ian and I were talking about this podcast, and I brought up the Owen Meany thing, we are kind of talking about like, what do we name it? What do we do? Like, where are we going? What are the takeaways? And this is going to sound kind of goofy, and it's not something we rehearsed or practiced, but it's kind of what my mindset is. Like, you in your life is a wind-up toy, and you get to wind yourself up and point yourself in a certain direction. And we're humans, so we're not really wind-up toys. We get to adjust and adapt and move. But if you put yourself into a situation or an environment that it's agreeable for you, and you continue to just move along and you continue to just accrue skills, you never know where that's going to go. So if you're like, okay, I'm 23 years old, I'm starting a new job, I want to be rich someday, what do I do? Just be incredible at what you do. Learn as much as you can. Talk to people. Have receptors that are open so you're listening and hearing. If there's someone who's 30 years older than you that takes an interest in you and wants to mentor you or give you advice, listen. These are things that start to happen that give you an ability to understand where you're at, process, and then produce. And as you do that enough times, opportunities start to come up, and then you get to stack wins. It's when I was working at Outback, I started off as a busboy, and then I moved to waiter, and then I went to the University of Florida and I got demoted to dishwasher. Then I got back to busboy, waiter, then I became a head waiter, and then I became a bartender. Each one of those jobs built on the other job. Having an understanding of what the busboy has to do as a bartender made me a better bartender. And that's a really simple example in a restaurant, but having the exposure to 5 different positions made me best when I finally got to the job of a bartender. And I made more money. I got better shifts. Like all this little stuff started to happen. And what I started to realize is I had these middle school successes with sales. I've had these successes in the restaurant world as a high school and a college kid. When I went to the business world, I mean, I was the lowest person on the totem pole for a period of time, but I also knew I'd already done this twice in other aspects of my life. If I just do the same things over and over again, I'm I start new, I listen, I grow. It helps. And then this is the most incredible part. When you get into an interview to get promoted, you tell those stories. You tell the story of, this is how I did it as a middle schooler. This is how I did it as a waiter and a bartender. This is how I've done it so far at this company. Success leaves clues. And if you can do something, whenever you watch anything on stocks, they always say past indicators are not an indication of future success. But in interviews, with behavioral interviewing, that's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think another big takeaway from your book, just seemingly unassociated paths can be linked by one skill. So you brought up an interview. I'll talk about my interview with the CEO of NVR. So when I went there, the way they were set up, they had they had the home building operation, which you were a part of, and it very difficult to sell a home. Well, it wasn't in '05. A monkey could have done it, but for the most part, it's normally hard to sell a home because you're competing with a lot. And the company also had a finance department, a mortgage company, and the loan officers were linked to sales reps. But the loan officers were handed business. They weren't really salespeople. They had to just keep it. They had to not screw up. And there was even money tied to the customer not leaving. And so the problem the CEO saw was he had a group of salespeople who didn't appreciate the business the way that they should, because they didn't have to earn it. They weren't fighting for it. And so it was an entitled company. It was terrible customer service, didn't capture a lot, didn't have good margins. And in that interview, as I listened, and I'd been with GE for 6 years. I had managed people that were cold calling. I had taught people how to prospect, how to sell. I was stunned. I remember looking at him and saying, how can you not appreciate how hard it is to get a customer? And I told him a story about like the hardest customer I ever had to get. How many times the guy said no to me. It took me 2.5 years. I had to give him like 50 references and he still didn't trust me until I finally closed him. And I told this story. And this customer, even, I had been promoted. I was a manager now, and I still kept pursuing this guy. And I still kept after him. And I closed him as a manager, gave the credit to one of my salespeople. But I said, when you've done something like that, you never take any customer for granted, no matter how it got to you. And so I think my story and my general background of having to go out and earn business from the ground up, which, let's be real, sales reps at Ryan Homes don't even do that. The marketing's done for them. Largely, the NVR machine is funneling people to your model most of the time. So truly going out and finding a deal and hunting, that really wasn't anywhere in NVR at all. It resonated with him. And by the time when I came in to start leading people who were entitled, it bothered me. And the most entitled people went first. I started seeking people who were entitled and firing them as quick as I could, because they made me sick. It made me sick that you could take a customer for granted. And partly it was because I knew how damn hard it was to go get one, that I was polar opposite of an entitled salesperson. And, I was wrecking shop from day one because they irritated me.
You were Wreck-It Ralph when you got in there. One of the first things Ian and I ever
I'm going to wreck it.
One of the first things Ian and I ever bonded over is I had one of these entitled the loan officers in my division, and she was working. And we had a Monday sales meeting that started at 9, and she rolls in at like 9:40. And I know she come rolling in at 9:40. She comes rolling in with like a bag of food that was still hot, where like the grease.
Subway sandwich.
Oh, it's like a degree. It wasn't Subway, it was Wawa, but there was like something in there that was like the grease. You could still smell it, and you could tell it was still making grease marks on the paper bag. And she was already 40 minutes late. It's like, just stay in your car for 5 more minutes and eat the damn food, then come up without it. But She was entitled. She didn't think about it.
That was a fun conversation to have with you. We're like, could
Yeah,
you at
Ian's
least
like,
pretend like you care about us?
yeah, I mean, it was incredible. But this is the funniest part. This woman was buying a house where if Ian let her go, we were going to have a spec, which means I have a house with no buyer because she was going to lose her job. So it was like,
So not only was she an employee, she was a customer of Frank's. Also, she was buying a house.
right. So what was funny about this story, there's nothing funny in it for her, but like for us as managers, what we looked at is like, every time I go to corporate, I get killed because my capture rate sucks. But one of the reasons my capture rate sucks is this woman who's taking my business for granted and showing up late with her food. So I'm like, Ian, I'll take a spec. Let's get me somebody new. If you got a better person. So what's funny about this story is Ian, we do what we need to do. We get the new person in place, and about 3 months goes by, and Ian goes, Frankie, I got to tell you, one of our mentors, his name is Paul Mock. He goes, Paul Mock would have had me do that, but he wouldn't have had a spec.
He would have had me wait 2 months until we closed the house.
I love that.
But you know that it was the same with you in starting Cava companies. You know, you had learned every aspect of real estate in working at MBR, sales, construction, everything. When you got there, all of it applied.
Absolutely. And the other thing that we didn't talk about, but I thought about this since we started today, is I had a non-compete. So I couldn't just go do what I did at NBR, but I had all of these skills. And what I did is I got to sit down and say, okay, it's 2009. The real estate market sucks. I don't have as much money as NBR. So I don't want to replicate what NBR is, and I'm legally not allowed to. So why would I pick a shoot or an area or a focus that I'm good at, that my skill set gives me unique talents in, but keeps me insulated from my non-compete, and it's better for me. And ultimately, this is the first time I ever had to lay all my chips on the table and say, here are all the avenues in which I can pursue. And I can do this because I built at this point, 11 or 12 year career, and I'd stack chips.
When I got to NVR, a big reason why I came to NVR was the stock option equity. And the reason why I knew stock options well is because of my experience at GE. So stock options, if you don't know, it's a way of giving executive equity, and you can't just cash them anytime. They have timing restraints. And GE thought about stock options a lot different than NVR. NVR only gave it to the top executives, and they got them every so years. At GE, every year, people were given, the top 10% were given stock options. Now you got less, but as an entry level employee, I got stock options one year because I was considered the best of my class. So I got them every year, and I had good mentors that explained to me, hold those to fruition, hold those all 10 years, and they'll be worth a lot more. And so when I got to NVR, I just always had that in my mind of when they do come due. So if you're given stock options, in 3 years, some of them you could start to sell. And it's like giving yourself a bonus. It's really nice. But you could also hold it. Well, I found out one time from our CEO that 80% of his executives sold within a week of the first date hitting. So none of them held them for the extra 7 years. They would sell it as soon as it came out. And he would always kind of, what's wrong with these idiots? Like, why are they doing that? The only way to make money is to not let those get taxed and let them ride all the way to the 10-year. And I watched, that's how he did it. That's how my boss, the president, did it. That's how the richest people in the company held. And the reason you knew that is it's publicly traded. So it's a reportable event every time they would sell. But you would look at, like, when did they get them? And it would be like, holy shit, 9.5 years ago, they held it all the way until the end. And so I did as well. And the same options that were given to me as another executive, mine would be worth, by the time they hit my bank account, 5-6 times as much, because I didn't sell and go buy a car, or whatever they were doing with that money. They felt the need to use it. I would just sit and wait. Very boring, but I learned that skill at a different company. And at NVR, people weren't teaching executives that skill, or even how stock options worked, because I remember telling you that and you saying, I can hold these for 10 years, because no one had explained it to you.
Right. It was really, the options that I ended up getting were always underwater. I never cashed them out. I left NVR before I got any that were valuable. But the people I learned from were cashing them out the second that they were available. And there's a fabulous line in Gulliver's Travels, and it's in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And what you realize, and if you've ever read Gulliver Travels, like this person travels all around. In one place, he's a giant, and the next place, he's a midget. In some places, people are blind. Some people, you never know. But it takes me to a different thing. So I think with human nature, right? And like being unique, as we are unique human beings, sometimes we have self-consciousness around our unique skills. And sometimes it's the fear of missing out, or the grass is always greener. And like, Ian, I remember when I was learning my business, I'd already quit my job, but I was learning how to get better. And there's a guy out of Arizona, his name is John Burley. I really respect John Burley. He taught me a lot. And I bought his courses and listened to his tapes. And I ultimately went out to Arizona and I met him. And when my kid was born, he sent me a note. Like, he's a great guy. He taught me a ton. But I remember sitting there and I was listening to DVDs or something. And he was in real estate, but he used to do insurance sales. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I wish I had the same skills he had in insurance sales. And I remember thinking that for a while. And then I realized, I'm like, that's a dumb thing to wish. I don't need insurance sales. I've got a different skill set than him. Yeah. And it just so happens that I was trained by the best home builder in the class. I've got things that he doesn't have. But as a kid raised the way that I wasn't thinking about my unique skills. I was thinking about my deficits. And what I started to realize was, because I'm unique, because I have a different way of looking at these things, because of my education, it actually makes me better, or it gives me some distinguishing skills and characteristics. And the first time I ever saw that in a career was when you would transition from GE to NVR.
Well, different can be very good for you. You know, if you, I would highly recommend to most people at some point in their life to pivot to a totally different industry, where their experience somewhere else can go apply somewhere else to see how it works. So, you know, Owen Meany, your boy, he's a dwarf. He's different. He's the only person that could have fit through the window. He's the only person that could have been thrown. He was kind of unique. So he's the hero in the story because of it. And for me, so at MBR, they had an annual meeting every year. All the home builders had their big annual meetings. These were huge events. This is when everyone got their awards. It was kind of a big part of the culture. In the 7 or 8 years before I was at the company, Frank, how many times did you see someone from the mortgage company at one of those annual meetings?
For those of you listening to radio, 0.
0. So 0 times. So at GE,
that's not true. There was a training event. Inman came and scared the crap out of all of us, but that was our only exposure ever to mortgage.
The mortgage company was not allowed to talk at these meetings. They didn't have any credibility. They weren't given the same cachet. And so what I first started by doing was going to all the presidents that I worked with and saying, if you want us to be a big part of your business, show your people that we're important, put me up there on stage with you. Let me go there, let me present, trust that I will not embarrass you. I will do a good job. And so when you talk about transferable skills, at GE, on a regular basis, there's so much bureaucracy, so many senior executives, officers, everything. And they were always coming to town, big town visit, you know, some senior executive, an email would go out like a marketing, like Tony Robbins is coming to town, right? And we're looking for customers to take them to, and they're going to present, but also they want to see our heads of business present. So on a regular basis, if you were one of the top 10%, you would get pulled into these meetings. But not only did you have to get called into a meeting, you'd have to whip together a PowerPoint and a little quick deck and explain what's going on in your market, what your challenges are, and where you need help from that senior executive. And so I got very qualified in short notice, whipping together a really good presentation, making my point and asking for something. And so when I was at MBR and I convinced these presidents to let me come speak in an annual meeting, I was ready. I've done this so many times to go make an impression on the sales force, which was my customer, that I would get up there, I would be funny, I would crack jokes, I would pick on the presidents that brought me up there to have a little bit of fun. I would make my point, I would ask for it. And I stood out in a company. NVR didn't have many people that were any good at presenting. Actually, almost all of them were terrible. They would just read from the slides. There was no humor in any of these meetings. And what came out of that is one president would tell another one, you should have Ian at your meeting. He's hilarious. He really kind of brought it up. And that sent a message to everyone in the other side of the business that mortgage is on par with who we are. And that Ian guy must be important because he's up there cracking on Rainer Altman or Tom Busher, who report to the CEO, and they're taking it. So he must be friends with them. We should probably respect that guy. And if he asks us for something, we should probably be careful.
It was awesome because I was in the audience. The first year you presented at one of these meetings, I was in the audience as just a normal worker. The second year that you presented at the meeting, I was actually had been promoted to a vice president's role. So the second year you made fun of me, but it was funny because I knew you were a year younger than me. You came in from the outside. Kenny used to call you GQ because you dressed better than everybody else at NVR. And it was hysterical because what Ian did is he just assumed a position of power. And not until I got to know him did I understand, like, oh, nobody told him to do this, but because he had such incredible platform skills, he kind of assumed and acted as if. And for all of us, we were like, oh, this Ian guy, I mean, he's up there, like, he summers with Rainer is what I was thinking. Like, and he did it because he had a different skill set that gave him an ability to act in a way that was so foreign from the rest of us.
Yeah. And the presidents loved it because they knew their meeting was boring. They knew that they weren't really that great at it and it was kind of a drag. And so they kept giving me more and more. Like the first one was like, we can give you 5 minutes, GQ, get up there and do something. Next meeting, I see the agenda and it's like 30 minutes, state of the economy, Ian Mathews. And I'm like, state of the economy? That's pretty heavy stuff. I'm gonna have to talk about, the year before was like, talk about your stats. It evolved into something more where they wanted me to come there because it livened up their meeting. So that's how I added value to these high level guys, is I made their meeting fun.
But what you did is you came in from the outside with a different skill set and you found a way to be unique. And then you added incredible value. And then what happened was, like, if you sucked at your job, but you were great at presentations, it wouldn't have mattered. But you did a great job. You talked about it in a way that was unique and fun. You started to get the spotlight. And then what happened is there was inertia. Things started to change for you. Like everybody had, like, the stodgy people up top weren't kind of recognizing this, but there was this groundswell of support for you from all the regions and the area people and the presidents of the home builder. And eventually that made its way up the chain to the CEO. And you did a good job at your core job, but you did this other ancillary stuff too. And that is how you build momentum. It's how you build a career. It's how you end up being invaluable and not someone who is expendable or replaceable. And those are the things. So you can do this from inside an organization, or you can take your skills and move somewhere, or you could do it the way that I did it with my career. This is an example too, right? So it's exactly the opposite of Ian's. On the mortgage side, they hired people who were completely experienced. On the home building side, they hired people that were inexperienced. And I was like less than 30 days out of college. I show up on my first job, and this like hardened old plumber wants to give me a hard time. And he asked me a question, and he thinks he's going to stump me because he stumps everybody because they hired English majors. So they asked me like a very simple question. And I was like, of course, this is the answer. It's right here. And he kind of looks at me and goes, oh, you know how to read blueprints? I'm like, yeah, you got any other questions? And I would have said asshole, but back then I was nicer. And it was no, but that just ended it. And now it wasn't the same level of power that Ian had with these presentations, but it gave me inertia. And
you stood out of all of your peers that were hired within 12 months. You graduated faster off of the technical program. You
Yes.
made an impression on the more experienced guys because, oh, this guy has it. So there were some people that were probably nervous to be around you because you had that competency, but you were unique. And that's, I think that's what we're trying to say here is the more unique you can be when you come into a situation, the better. You don't want to blend in. Blend in is terrible advice if you want to make money.
Correct.
Blend in gets a 2.5% raise every year. That's what blend in gets you.
That's right. And you can't be such a unicorn that they don't know what to do with you. You need to be able to be good at the core competencies of the job. But if you can stand out and you're unique and you have a unique voice or skill set or perspective, it can make you stand out in an incredible way.
Yeah, me doing my job, Frank, and running my business well, it might have gotten some kudos from me, from the presidents to the CEO when I wasn't in the room. But by me doing all the extra stuff and becoming friends with them and being liked and helping them, they raved about me to the CEO. And when promotion opportunities came up, it was always me that got them out of all the regionals. And that's because I was marketing myself, and I was marketing myself to people that I knew would spread word of mouth for me. Just like a business, you want a referral is the best way to get a new customer. It's the same way to make a name for yourself.
You were unique because of the platform skills. But I remember being a GM and I was in Charlottesville or Culpeper or somewhere, and I drove to Fairfax to be in a meeting with you. And what was unique to me is you were in the room. Like, we'd had those meetings 100 times and mortgage was never there. You were also unique because you're like, hey, we suck, and we suck for these reasons. And I know we're somebody who you guys don't really have high hopes for or have any expectations of. And frankly, that's lazy thinking. So the platform skills are the shiny object, but the talk track of, I know we sucked and we're going to be better now. That's why I'm here. That's what gets you in the room, and that's what perpetuates the message. So I just want to reiterate this point. Being unique is awesome, but you got to have the chops to be unique. You got the core fundamentals need to be taken care of. You just can't be an eccentric. But if you have a bit of eccentricity, but you're taking care of all your core competencies, that is when there's miracle grow on your career.
I think the last thing that we're going to talk about on this story is, a lot of times people think, good fortune just happens, luck just happens. And we've both said this many times. We are very fortunate. We've had a lot of good opportunities come our way. But what most people miss is all of the hooks that we've put into the water that have not gotten bites. And when you do put a hook in and it gets a big bite, it's exciting and it's easy to say, oh, that's luck. But what you don't see is all the hooks you put out there. And I'll tell a quick story. I know you have one too. Just a week ago, so our tech startup, Keep, I started writing. I was talking to David. I'm like, I'm going to start writing about our journey because we have some fun stories. And so I wrote a story about Shaq because we just bid on Shaq at a charity auction and spent $10,000 to get an hour with him at his house. And it's a unique story. It's an interesting story. It's one that catches your attention. It did well on LinkedIn, got a lot of attention, got thousands of views. So a couple of days after I wrote it, David gets a call from one of the more high-level engineers that was at his previous company. And this guy works at Microsoft, makes $300,000 a year, probably way too high-powered to come into a little startup like ours that's doing well, but he's asking him all these questions. And he's getting more and more excited. And David's like, where is this coming from? And David, out of the blue, just brings up the Shaq story. And he says, I know, I read about that on LinkedIn. And David was like, oh my God, like, all those little hooks you're putting out there. And some days when I'm writing, I'm like, is anyone even reading this stuff? Is anyone, same with our podcast. We put videos out. Sometimes 7 people engage with it. Sometimes 90 people like it. And it's never the one I expect that does well. And you don't know which one signs up for a podcast or which one leads to something. But that doesn't happen because I only posted one story all year. I post every single day, and some of them do good things for me and some of them get lost in the archives, but good luck doesn't happen because you put one hook in the water. You have to put thousands of hooks in the water, and a few are going to get bites.
I'll come back to something that credits Wayne Gretzky in a second, but Ian and I did a deal together. If you're a loyal listener, that you've heard us talk about this, but I want to back up. I had a degree in construction management. I distinguished myself. I go to work for a home builder. I learned home building. I learned estimating. I learned sales. I learned management. I learned land acquisition. I learned all these things. I branched out on my own, and I had to really learn banking. I had to learn finance. I had to learn all this other stuff. So I'd been in business about 8 years, and this deal comes across the wavelengths, and it's for a chance for me to buy 30 houses for $3 million. So it was, at the time, it was the biggest deal we'd ever done. So we did the deal. But when I was at NVR, I remember they had a PR department. They had a firm that they work with called Williams Whittle, did all the PR. So I had just seen this, and I didn't manage it, but I was like, this is probably a story that's a pretty big allure. So I paid a local marketing company for their advice to help me get in touch with someone from the local business paper. And I didn't pay to be in the paper, but I paid for the advice, and I paid for how to strategically do it. And I ended up talking to him, and he wrote a story about it, and it ended up in the business paper. Fast forward about 5 months, I get a phone call out of the blue.
Which you also shared on LinkedIn, and it got a ton of engagement, thousands of views. I remember that. That was a great post you had shared on that.
Well, on the 30 unit deal, I didn't do that. I actually was ignorant to that. You hadn't started the LinkedIn side. So I didn't post that one. I just was in the paper. But so I get a call from this person out of the blue, and they're like, hey, I know you sold, you bought this 30 unit portfolio. We've got somewhere between, 50 and 150 houses we're willing to sell. Call us. That turned into the 75 unit portfolio that we bought. Now, I'd already done the playbook on the 30, but I didn't do the social media side. So this time I post the social media because Ian was saying, Frankie, put that out there. And I did. I ended up posting on my birthday in 2020, and it ends up getting thousands of views. And that has brought me even more deals. I'm looking at 150 something unit portfolio now. But the point is, all these different skills, everything from the home building to the fix and flip, to the selling, to the renting, but also a skill that I hadn't even thought about, like PR, to a skill like, hey, Frankie, I'm posting on LinkedIn and Quora. You should probably put this on LinkedIn and Quora, and look what it did. So these are like little things that you just pick up along the way. And because I had talked to Ian, who was good with LinkedIn, and I really wasn't, I posted it there too. So all of this stuff starts to metastasize and grow. And it becomes the famous book about Warren Buffett is called Snowball. It starts to snowball.
Yeah.
But for me, it started with going to work with my granddad and my dad in construction and selling candy bars in front of a grocery store.
Yep. All of it. And it's, that portfolio did really well. And you and I are not working on that if I'm not telling you that I've been raising money on other real estate deals. And you build that connection. You have to share things. I think the example there that's just beautiful is you shared with the world that you did a great 30 unit deal. You have to tell people. And I think, Frankie, a lot of people are just, and I've been guilty of this. I don't want to sound like a braggart. I don't want to sound like some egocentric, arrogant guy talking about all the good stuff I'm doing. But if you don't, how are they going to know to contact you? How are they going to know if you hadn't have done that? There is no 75 unit deal. You and I are not talking about working on it together, and our investors didn't get a 30% return. So it was not a selfish thing for you to do that. A lot of people, including myself and my friends, made great money because you were willing to put yourself out there. So put as many hooks as you can in the water, and you're going to get some fish no matter what. So let's wrap this up, Frankie. I think what we've said today, I love that you brought this book into my world. I'm not going to read it because you've told me so much of it, but it's a fascinating story. So I think the more things you try, the better chances you have of getting lucky. Look for ways to apply your skills to something more profitable. Frank talks about the pivot. Change your context to something more profitable when you've got the skills. And it's a volume game. Life is a volume game, no matter what it is. If you put in the work, if you put in the 10,000 hours, your skills will transfer. If you do the work of marketing, telling people what you can do, something is going to hit for you.
Yep. And I'll wrap it with this. Ian and I are sports junkies. Wayne Gretzky talks about you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And even at his peak, Michael Jordan went into the gym and shot hundreds of foul shots every day. You got to do the core fundamental stuff. You got to keep building on the skill. You got to keep honing it. But you also need to pull your head up from time to time. Michael Jordan made a lot of money playing basketball, but he made even more money working with Nike. The point is, like, he had a core skill and he was the best in the world at it, but he also stopped enough time to look and say, I could become a marketing icon if I do this properly. And I'm never going to be sponsored by Nike, most likely. But the thing that's important is hone your skills, find a place where your skills are valuable, and continue to just take chances. If you're in corporate America, you got to be a little bit carefuler with the chances, but you take your chances, you take your shot, you keep doing things, you're looking around. And if you do that, you never know when that skill is going to come back to help you and benefit you and make you stand out or be unique.
And Frankie, who knows? All of that time spent watching the Cosby Show may come back to help us in this podcast at some point, buddy.
I don't know about the Cosby Show, buddy, but I do know about Seinfeld. Seinfeld has definitely helped.
Another Peacock show, another NBC.
No doubt.
Hey, great chatting with you today, buddy.
It's always a good time, Ian.
Always a pleasure.
They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.